Welcome everybody at Digital Revolution and its second edition, taking place partly at the single International Arts Campus, which is our partner for organizing this training. We are here with 25 participants from 25 countries coming from all over the world, from all continents, to reflect on the relationship between festivals and art organizations and new technologies and the digital world, which we have all been part of over the last year. So I'm happy to introduce a very international panel as well with Mark Russell from Under the Radar Festival in New York, with Rashmi Dhanwani from Artix Company in India, with Martin Honzik from Ars Electronica in Austria, and with Dr. Tegan Bristow, who is running Fakugency Digital Festival in South Africa. The conversation will be facilitated by Mike van Graan, a South African playwright and who is running Stand Foundation. So over to you, Mike, to facilitate this opening keynote panel of this 4-day program.
Thanks very much, Inga. And the topic for our panel, as people would know from the program, is how is COVID-19 and I suppose the related lockdown restrictions that many of us have encountered and are still encountering in some of our countries, shaping our arts practice and our festival world. And many of us have had to retreat to the digital space. Others have been organizing digital festivals for a while, and we're lucky to have a couple of them on the panel as well. And as Inga said, it's a very diverse panel. And before we opened up to go live, we were talking about how necessary it is for us to be talking from within different contexts, because the days of defining a solution that would suit all of us, it's simply, well, if those days ever were appropriate, they are certainly not appropriate now, because our context is so different. Our experience of digital technology, our access to the internet, access to resources, access to expertise, fundamentally different across the world. So we're delighted to have, and this is the order in which they will be presenting to us, Mark from North America. He'll be followed by Tegan from Africa, and then she'll be followed by Martin, just to confuse him a little bit more, from Europe, and we'll end off with Rashmi from Asia. So we have 4 continents represented on the panel today, and each of them will have about 8-9 minutes or so to present, after which we'll facilitate a conversation and then invite the people who are part of the Festival Academy, as well as those listening, to send questions or comments, which we'll pick up and then put to the panel. Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope I can be reasonably brief. I'm going to show you, if I can find it. No, I can't. I was going to share my screen, but I think I'll just talk, if that's all right. I'm Mark Russell. I'm the founder and artistic director of the Under the Radar Festival in New York City. It's a core program of a place called the Public Theater. And I want to give a big overview of the organization and the history. Let me take this moment to recognize that the Public Theater is built on the Lenape land, the original owners of the Manhattan Island. It's also built on the grounds where free men, Black people that had escaped slavery, first farmed. And later, where P.T. Barnum, the impresario who brought the world of Tom Thumb and Jenny Lind as his first exhibits. One of the richest men in the 1800s, John Jacob Astor, built his personal library across the street from his house. And that's the building in which we work today. His library was the core of the New York Public Library before me moved in. The building was used by an institution that dealt with Jewish refugees after they came to the US from the World War II. The Public Theater in New York is the closest you might get to a national theater in the US. We opened in 1967 with a little show called Hair. And then it continued with a chorus line, and we introduced the world to Hamilton. We have 7 stages. The Delacorte Theater in Central Park, where we do free Shakespeare in the park every summer. 5 theaters of different sizes in our downtown space. They have, well, the largest one being 300 seats, and Joe's Pub, a music and cabaret venue. We also tour with a mobile unit and have a program called Public Works that works year round in the community, eventually staging a huge pageant at the Central Park at the Delacorte Theater. Every January since 2006, the public has hosted the Under the Radar Festival, which is dedicated to independent theater makers who push the boundaries of the form. Now creating its 18th edition, UTRB has become a landmark of the New York theater season. We are an international festival dedicated to true exchange between cultures, with the continuing main question of why do theater now? UTR began as an answer to the limited isolationist world view of George W. Bush. We began as a political statement representing a new generation of American theater artists, Elevator Repair Service, The Civilians, Pig Iron Theater, Young Gene Lee, and many, many others. To put this work in context, we invited companies from Europe, Asia, and South America, Forced Entertainment, Compagnie dos Actores, the Vivarium Studios of Philip Kane, Superamas, Entente Grude, Berlin, Guillermo Calderon, Rimini Protocol, and Loli Arias, et cetera, et cetera. UTR happens right next to a major conference of the United States and international presenters, the Association of Performing Arts Professionals, APAP. They were actually our host funder for many years. ISPA also happens during our time frame. These are pretty impenetrable conferences for foreigners. UTR gave a portal and guidance to a host of arts gatekeepers from abroad. We rose very quickly to be a destination festival, as one might think of the Kunsten Festival with a lot less money. In January, and this will all sound very familiar to all of you, I'm sure, we had one of our most critically acclaimed and well-attended festivals that January. We were making big plans to build on that success, and then the world shut down. The public theater tried to adjust and adapt to the new situation. We produced one of the earliest, and I think one of the most successful Zoom plays by Richard Nelson. So what do we need to talk about? We also took our planned free Shakespeare production and turned it into a serialized Richard II over the radio in 4 parts. It played in over 60 markets. We projected things on our building. We commissioned a documentary play on frontline responders, doctors, nurses, and ambulance men. In May, 1 week from our most important gala night, George Floyd happened. Black Lives Matter became a serious event. We pulled our benefit and went into a long series of conversations about what it means to be an anti-racist organization. At the festival, we continued to invent scenarios and rosters of artists and events. Surely we would be doing a show in January of 21. I think I went through about 28 budgets and different iterations of the festival, only to finally get the green light to go ahead 6 weeks out from our opening date. We presented a slimmer festival, all of it COVID safe, most of it on Zoom. Some filmed in December and January to be made available on demand. Some actually shot and performed live and streamed directly to our audience on Zoom. The most unique and powerful show of the festival, in my regard, actually took place over a phone call between strangers. 600 highwaymen's, 1,000 ways. We were able to keep our international profile with contributions from Javad Alipur, Inua Elams, and Trinidad Gonzalez. We made an introduction video for our devised theater working group, independent theater makers from all walks, comedy, music, playwriting, and performance, and we hope to present their final pieces in this next Under the Radar 22. UTR also hosts a symposium to begin the festival each year, mostly open to professionals in the field. The symposium usually has plenary sessions, but quickly leads its members on a series of performances from the festival. Those are the breakout sessions, and the real work gets done over coffee or drinks between the shows. In 2019 and 2020, we hosted a full dinner for the 140 participants in the symposium. This year's symposium was all virtual. I was running a TV show. It was produced on a Zoom platform with some content like the keynote from Mark Mamuti Joseph pre-recorded. Since we had decided that the whole festival should be free, so was the symposium, open to all. We were able to attract over 800 participants from around the world to intersect with this virtual symposium. It was a very successful meeting. We focused a lot on post-show talkbacks with each show, some of them after every show. These did give the festival some sense of community. The live and interactive pieces were the most successful, I felt. We also, since the whole festival was free, invited several festivals and organizations to be global partners, offering our material to be streamed free on their platforms. And we had over 20 global partners eventually from all over the world. Each year, Under the Radar tries to imagine what its audience might need for a festival. What will resonate with them now? Somehow this festival landed it very well with audiences. Yes, they had seen a lot of Zoom shows, but this gave them a wide variety of experiences under one digital roof. The 600 Highwaymen piece was extraordinary if you know their work. They'd been working with audience agency for some time, but this was a very pure distillation. A one-on-one moment over the phone with a stranger. The phone suddenly felt like a very intimate tool after all of the video. The conversation between the two audience members was facilitated by a robotic voice cued by a team of trained technicians listening in on the conversations. Embedded in this conversation were prompts, commands. There was even a story. By the end of the experience, the first time I tried it, I felt that I knew this stranger on the other end of the line out in the middle of Arizona on an intimate level, almost a spiritual connection. I wanted to send her a Christmas card, but she was gone. As I approached this festival, I came to believe that no matter what technology we were going to use, the key to it all was presence, the essence of the moment, the theater moment. What is this happening now between us and the artists, between us and our fellow Zooming audience members? It gave the festival a gravity and a core. Theater is basically a very primal act, sharing stories and experiences. Sometimes that can be for 2,000 people in a huge hall, and sometimes it happens between two people following prompts on a telephone call. I come from the performance art, theater, and dance world. These deal so much without artifice and physical honesty. People are always hungry for these connections. This foray into the virtual world made me and my artists rediscover theater anew. It tested us. We are planning our Under the Radar 2022 festival right now. I begin next week to find the money and connect the art, and we'll wait to see what we can actually do according to the COVID laws by January 2022. I'm sure it will be some sort of hybrid event, trying to keep the range and openness of what we discovered this year while getting back to the group of people snuggled in a dark room, listening to stories, absorbing the past to create new future, a transient community coming together for a brief moment in time to witness and actually help create a vision of how to exist in the world. Now, for the real question, how COVID-19 is shaping our festival world and the digital space, well, we are not going back. COVID-19 opened doors and created new paths. We have also experienced, the world has experienced, a year without art. I believe this has hopefully increase the appetite for live work and festival and coming together. And I think we have a base to build from that will be very exciting. That was, hopefully that answered it somewhat. Maybe we can get through that in the conversation. Thanks a lot for listening. I hope I didn't go too much over time.
That was a great start. Thank you very, very much, Mark. Lots of questions that are kind of embedded within your presentation, but we'll come back to that once we've had all of our panelists make their presentation. So let's move from New York over to Johannesburg. Tegan.
Thanks, Mike. All right. I don't think I'm going to be as poetic as Mike was. It felt like very wonderful to listen to and hear, and I'm going to rely more heavily on my screen. Let me do a quick screen share, and I'm going to be sharing from my browser dominantly and sharing from the festival website. So as you mentioned previously, I've been directing since 2016 a festival called the Fakugency African Digital Innovation Festival out of Johannesburg in South Africa. And it is a project that is an actual joint project between the School of Arts, where Brett and I work, the Wits School of Arts, which is a university school of arts, and the Tshimologong Innovation Precinct, which is an innovation precinct associated to the university, but not formally part of it, that focuses on innovation. Specifically technological innovation. It's unique because it's placed in the inner city and is one of the few innovation hubs that really looks at bringing people in directly from the street. So it's very accessible. People can walk in with ideas and enter into an incubation program with technology quite quickly. So in 2014, we began the festival as a mechanism to try and meet the sort of growing interest in technological innovation in Africa and digitization and African culture. Mostly because there was a huge lack around conversations around what technology and culture actually mean, and particularly African culture. How does African culture present itself within the technological? What are the criticisms that exist for technology and technology culture from an African cultural perspective? The African culture was very undervalued when addressing technology and innovation on the continent, but it had a significant contribution. And I think when everybody knows Black Panther and Wakanda, and the minute Black Panther hit the screens, there was a sudden sort of about turn on what Africa offers for futurism. We all know that Afrofuturism, which is an American originating philosophy, has played quite a big part in informing that. But what does it really mean for Africans, and what are Africans able to do within that space, and what are they trying to envision and present for themselves? So that's where Fakugency comes from. It comes from the ability to support, platform, engage mostly young digital creatives on the continent. We're based in Johannesburg, but really do see ourselves as a Pan-African encounter, English speaking, but we do have sister festivals in Mozambique, in Senegal. So actually you'll be speaking to Marianne tomorrow, who, so her festival, AfroPixel, is one of our kind of partner sister festivals. And also where Ignacio is now in Egypt, a festival called Chirotronica, which is inspired by Ars Electronica, which you'll hear more about from Martin in a minute. So just to kind of put you in the picture a little bit on what Fakugency is about, I'm going to just play this video, and I hope that you can hear it. Can you hear it? Okay, great.
It's inevitable to be third world when your name has been extracted from your tongue and its gravitas unearthed from your mind. With fragments in our hands, attempted recreating beauties lost to the sleeping moon. Africa, you are the essence of innovation and origin of civilization. So the Fakugency Festival is all about digital art, digital innovation, looking at really cool projects and displaying them and showcasing all of the talent that South Africa and other African countries have to offer.
It's a meeting place for content creators, technologists, VR enthusiasts. Fakugency is the springboard of revival in Africa.
I feel like this is a good place to come and meet people, network, see amazing work, be inspired, plot and scheme, and also learn basic technical things from people that know a bit better.
Glad Now is forcing me to interact with people and to see how their knowledge and their skills can contribute to my work and how I can also help in that exchange.
I think Fakugency is playing a huge and important role in being the renaissance of change in Africa.
Africa. Set your own table before the world. Deck it with your own systems. Feast on your force to drape descendants with a power. Not all that is foreign is greater than your own. Hone your force. Own your ish.
Okay. I think that gives you an impression of the festival and what it is that we're trying to do. This is actually a video from 2019. We didn't make a video in 2020 because we went online, and our entire archive of the festival is actually online in multiple videos. And I think many of you in this discussion so far have actually spoken about the fact that your festivals were archived almost automatically because you were putting them on screen and recording them in different ways. So that was our experience of Fakugency. But one of the things that we learned last year and going online, and one of the first things we did was actually with the support. One of the things that we learned, one of the first projects we did in collaboration with the National Arts Festival, which is a huge theatre festival in South Africa, very, very well attended and centuries old, not centuries old, it feels like centuries old, but a very old festival, is that we did a kind of collaboration between theatre practitioners and digital artists, and realized that, you know, one of the things that we have in our tool house as a digital festival, as a festival that promotes and works with digital artists, is a huge network of digital creatives, which the rest of the world, especially in Africa and in South Africa, hadn't really been looking at. You know, gaming and animation and digital things were like over there for the other creative industries. You know, music kind of dabbled in it a bit, but theatre really didn't deal much with digital, and neither did fine arts. And then suddenly there was this real need to try and understand what skill sets there are on the continent from a digital perspective. And we started a really wonderful collaboration that happened very quickly and all online within the first few weeks of our lockdown. And we basically put together very well-known and quite talented theatre producers with young digital artists, threw them into groups, the way that you would throw groups together on Zoom, and said, make something. And in 2 weeks, they produced these really, really wonderful kind of experiments. We call them experiments in a project called the Virtual Blackout. And it was really, really exciting to see the potentials that came out of that, and the ideas that people had about digital and what was possible and what wasn't possible. And I think we sometimes forget that in those early stages of lockdown and going online, it was quite exciting. People were like, wow, what can we do? What can it do for us? Where will this take us? And these initial experiments, which you're welcome to explore further at Fakugency's Virtual Blackout link, were the very first instances of what can happen and how can it happen. And it was exciting to do this before our festival itself. I could talk you through the whole online festival, but I won't. We had a lot of really interesting collaborations. We ended up having, I think we had 168 contributors in the end, like actual creative contributors from across Africa. And one of the other things that we were able to do, and one of the focuses that we started picking up through the festival, was to understand who were the aggregators. Like, we as Fakugency always battled to find people who were curating or organizing digital art. We felt like we were one of the few platforms that really, really did that on the African continent. So one of our next focuses was to to kind of do an open call for curators, people who would be interested in working with other digital creators across the continent to make up new exhibitions and new work completely online. So this is another project that we ran first as a boot camp and then in training, and then we commissioned the following, well, we had 5 in the end, but 2 of them were working together. So Pumlani and Bali work together to produce online exhibitions. And what does it mean to produce online exhibitions? What are the things that really need to be challenged and questioned in this space? So when we say we produced an online festival, it wasn't just streaming, it wasn't just having online talks, we're also making things for the online space in a very, very collaborative manner, which for me was extraordinarily exciting. Especially because we were able to bring some of the artists that we've been working with for years into these really dynamic, creative collaborations. Sorry, I have very noisy birds. You can probably hear them. One of the other things that happened for us out of last year's festival was that with everybody going online and our ability to list all the people that were involved in the different projects as part of our program, we created this huge contributors list, which would have been printed out in a program before, or you would have come and met people in person at the festival. But going online, we realized that we could actually start creating an archive for amazing digital creatives across the African continent. And we also realized that we have fans. We have fans across the world who've been following Fakugency remotely and wanting to be involved more in Fakugency and understand what is happening in digital art on the continent. And we saw our international viewership like really blossom, and people who've been wanting to actually come to our festival but couldn't buy a ticket or couldn't come at that time were able to attend and really interact and see the work that was being produced. So this was really exciting for us. So our next phase of work will actually be about taking this kind of contributors list into something much more dynamic, and we're hoping to build it into a platform that brings visibility to African digital artists for sort of international views and also for collaboration and for further interaction. And we feel like we've done quite a full circle, because we started Fakugency with the intention of bringing attention to and platforming digital artists, and the festival has grown and grown and grown from a content perspective, but now we're quite adequately being able to give that level of visibility that we wanted for ourselves in a smaller way into a much bigger international way. So we're very happy about that. I don't know how long I've been talking, but that's most of what I had prepared.
Okay, that's great. I actually just in the chat gave you a little deadline there, and just in case the other panelists think that I'm favoring you as a fellow South African. So, but really, really an important contribution as well, Tegan. Thank you so much, because it's really a, you know, Africa within the global kind of space is kind of quite marginalized, and this is a great platform for projecting the creatives of the continent. So thank you very much for that. Martin, we're going to go on to you, since you operate in the digital festival world as well. Let's hear what you've learned over the last while.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, Tegan. I was part of a little bit of this endeavor in a similar situation, but far more exotic. There was an insight into almost hidden art scene and a growing art scene in an entire continent. From this position, thank you for this opportunity. And thank you also, Mark, for your interesting introduction into your world and your situation. I will try not to talk too much about my organization, then rather more try to kind of find some words about the entire situation. So the question that we were addressed here, and how the corona situation would influence us, our worlds, the species we are standing for, yeah, it's almost provocative. I wanted to start in saying no. Why should we change? Why should it change our lives? No, but yeah, everywhere it influenced us. It influenced all of us everywhere on this planet. And this, in my entire 52 years I am allowed to live on this planet, has never been before. There were some phenomena where the entire society, world society, was shocked. Was it 9/11? Was it Chernobyl? Was it 3/11 in Japan, and many other things? But this was affected we were affected and sitting on the sofa, and excuse me, Mark, not you, you were there, you were something there, but we were sitting on the sofa. We were brave consumer of media, and in between a snack, we said, wow, this is a common moment. We are society. We are a global society. We saw that this was not true. I mean, and we see and we realize and we live currently that this, what we experience now, is a real common. And you know, the common, and I said that before in the reflection of the first breakout session, I find it so interesting that the first common moment in my life, looking at an entire globe, shows me how extremely diverse we are. That there is not a global and general solution for the problems that we are facing with or without Corona. And one would say this is a disadvantage. And I would say this is the advantage, because evolution has always taken part and place because of diversity. That's the principle. The more opportunities you have in making a next step, the more diversity you have, the more in the opportunities, let's say like that, the higher is the chance that you are going to make it. So Corona changed a lot. It changed our thinking. It changed that we have blue sky to look at. It changed a little bit that we thought, okay, this crisis and this suffering going back to the normal, there was created some wisdom that we see, okay, there's not, like Mark said before, only the bad things taking place. We learn a lot. There are many, many opportunities. And even though I know we are in such a big shift that these opportunities we are talking currently, they will cause victims. The shifts are so big that it is not just done by switching on or off a light. It is a process, and the process takes time. And what we didn't achieve so far, as the stupid humankinds we are, I'm sorry, is to break time. Time is bigger. So it was that we had to break a lens for us as a society, for us as being individuals, but also we had to break a lens and do something for risking that the entire art scene would disappear due to the fires that we have to take care for that are more important. It seemed that we have no role, that we were the clowns for free time, that we were competing with some sports event and nothing against sport and other things. But it is not the case. And I think we have a role, and I think this is the opportunity for us representing the culture, whatever field of culture we all are representing, that we are not the decoration of a society, that we are even not the mirror. I mean, yeah, we are, but we have a role besides the fact that we have families, that we are humans, that we have neighbors, that we have a right for food, that we have kids, and that we have a nature all around us that is in a shift where we would need at the end us as an entire society. So Corona changed a lot, also in our activities, in our understanding, in our productions, in our form of collaborating. I just come from a weekend, a very intense weekend from the Pre-Ars Electronica, which is an international prize that we are running that represents the digital culture, the digital in different categories, computer animation, digital music, and so on, so on, so on. Every year, without asking for a topic, with almost no marketing budget, and it's an established prize, we receive more than 3,000 submitted fresh art pieces, art projects from all over the world. And this is a privilege. I mean, one could read what is going on in this world, what artists' mind is what the artist's mind is driving, what tools are they using to express themselves. And I've never I can say there was a phenomenon going on because we were expecting so many COVID things that artists are reflecting the sad situation in that they how they are struggling. It is the fact that this is happening. But what I can tell you is, and back to this COVID topic, there were a lot of huge fires burning before. And this COVID thing tends to isolate us in this panic of a pandemic, and tends to forget that there were even more crucial topics to solve out there. The fires kept on burning, and we are sitting in our beds in our apartments, and we think COVID is the biggest problem. So what we saw is that artists, that we received all of a sudden less submissions, which was interesting. To analyze this a little bit is, in the computer animation, it was less. Computer animation, you need to know, is a rather complex genre. It's a genre where artists have started already a long time before to collaborate, to work with each other. The digital might come up with a tool where you can do this, but we all know that, and this is also the lack of this here, this lack of empathy, this lack of quality, this our seventh sense is dead, so to speak here. I mean, and we need that, and we have this as a talent in understanding better what our opponents are the people we are in contact to are thinking, are feeling. So this pre-ars electronica was one phenomenon. So what did we see in this last year? We saw boring Zooms beside that one, boring streaming situations, lousy talks, but even more lousy situations where a total misunderstanding appeared in using technology. Some even were not using technology because we were thinking there must be the one genius to come up with the one technology solving our problems. No, the technologies are already there. They are even intelligent, if you want to call this intelligent. It is about our cleverness. It is about our skills to educate ourselves, to understand that these technologies are not for the 1%, and rather more invented for connecting us as humans in a better way. For making something happen if a corona virus is forcing us to isolate each other. Interesting was also that the music category was the only one that was increasing. Again, industrial revolution, digitalization, it made a shift in the 90s with an entire industry. The music industry was the first one where we saw, okay, my God, there is a total new dynamic running. And artists don't need the studios anymore. They have their studios on their mobiles, almost on their devices, and they can collaborate in a different way. So that is very interesting. But also there you see we have it to do with many endless different situations. So how would we, or how should we understand the digital? This we are here under the title of Digital Revolution Evolution. My organization has been guiding, accompanying this digital evolution for quite a long time, and we were kind of part in establishing this term of digital revolution. Yeah, and let's say, okay, there was a digital revolution, and now we saw that there was a digital transformation. But what was this transformation? It was the mystification of something that we thought we are far further in. And I'm not talking from the arts. I mean, I'm talking from those sitting at home, having a job, making home office and having 2 young kids, and they have to teach them. And then you see that it's our cultural backgrounds, how we embed, so to speak, technology in our cultural self-understanding. And it is for sure the big, huge social gaps that we have in our neighborhoods. We don't even have to think continental at that, but we have to, for sure. So the digital transformation was actually a shock. We are in between. And to solve this problem, what should we do then? I think this is the nexus. This is the momentum for us. We need a digital culture. And when I just some quotes and some samples out there, we are talking from racist algorithms. We are talking from the gender problem caused by software, by technology. And I say yes, but for sure, and by 100% no. So if we don't start to kind of embed the digital as an extension to our physical world with the given tools, if we don't embed this into our cultural self-understanding, into our ethics, we will never be able to solve the problems that we are currently facing, to close the big gaps between the real and the physical, to stop what the digital does with actually normal people in the way how they communicate, in the way how aggressive they are, and closing the circle to explain this, the society, to establish this culture. It is the chance for you guys and also for me, for us, because everybody in our situation, we are struggling. Our businesses, they broke away. For sure, we can say, okay, we made a stream, it was good, we had 25 people, yeah, blah, 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 blah. But we are running monuments. We are having costs, and we have museums and facilities. Our technologies are becoming old. We can throw them away when we are back in the game, and so on. There's such a big dynamic going on. So the digital culture for us, and I'm coming back to my organization, where we are trying to establish some aspects, and I'm on 7 minutes, I start to hurry up. What we try to establish is, the core question: what do we want from technology as a society? If we answer this for us, it's just the movie makers making sci-fi movies where the intelligent machines are taking over at the end. If we are aware that the philosophy tells us that there is nothing more human than technology, then we should be cool with this and say, hey, let's educate us. Let's try to lift the level of the average of education, and we become better citizens who are using the tools around them for their own sake in a better way, and who are able to connect themselves in a better way, far beyond political borders. So humanizing technologies is another thing, more or less what I tried to explain to you before. What we are also currently establishing is this platform for digital humanism. That's a mandate coming from the European Union, but it's actually a term that is not existing, invented by us. And there we are going to the global scale, looking at America, how they are using technologies and how they invented technologies. Much more, it's about data, the new gold, and this comes much more from the corner of the capitalism idea. Which is, by the way, since the Second World War, the one and only system that is overwhelming the entire planet, or let's say the Western Hemisphere. Then we have China. They are using the same technologies, but for the sake of a totalism background. It's not so much commercial orientated. It's not so much for the sake of economy, than rather more for the sake of controlling the individuals. So the only chance that is left for Europe is to critically rethink about that, and to think of a humanism, a digital humanism that we all desperately need, to create regulations in the digital, and to understand the digital as an extension and not a twin of this world, to understand that the natural laws inside there are not the same. If I'm just stupidly copying what I want to do, and now I'm talking from many samples of digital exhibitions and everything, all the formats that we know in our world, then you end up in a super bored visitor situation, and you end up in something where you just don't really get the opportunities there and the potential inside there. Art thinking is also something that is the momentum of our time. And I'm talking about I'm not talking about the role of the arts for the sake of arts. I'm talking from new business fields that in the time we are living in are required, because out there, even the big industry players, even the guys coming from big Silicon Valley, are outdated. They are not understanding the world anymore that they shaped and created with their own tools all of a sudden. So who the hell should step forward, raise the finger, and explain a little bit what's going on here? And who the hell should do the same and take over some roles in society? I know this is a paradigm. Art should be kind of always neutral. But in this situation that we are currently facing, it is the only chance. And in a situation where we are not able to blindly repeat what simply is not addressing anybody and anything anymore. We also have to be aware that we shift when everything is shifting. And I think that we can take a role, that we can take that we can take over a role in society. And so we need a new digital deal. And this is actually, I mean, an analogy to the Green Deal things, but even the Green Deals would not be realized when we don't have a common digital understanding of how to connect us. Digital deal, by the way, I know I'm running out.
Yeah.
But I want to finalize this, otherwise
Sure.
everything makes no sense. The digital deal is going to be the upcoming festival title. It is the conclusio for us and the offer for us to the society. And what we want to and need to solve, or let's say discuss there, is the digital feudalism that is currently around us, the digital democracy, these questions about democracy in the digital, in the real, the trust between the policymakers, the industry, and the legal experts, the question who owns the digital world, the working conditions in the digital world, coming from those who are the only benefiter in these crises, the digital humanism in general, and how does education in a digital 21st century looks like. So I'm ending, I think these are the crucial things that we have to answer. And what sounds so abstract is that in our 4 ICE sessions or in the smaller sessions, I would have concrete answers how we try to solve this. And I'd like to end with a quote that got established by the Hong Kongers by the riots there, but before by Mr. Hero, he himself, Bruce Lee. We guys from the culture, we should be like water. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you for that very passionate presentation and for the questions that you raised. I think that those are pretty crucial questions that we need to address, and probably needing more than even just the 4 days of just looking at those particular questions. I mean, I'd probably take another day to debate your assertion. I'm not so sure if it's an assertion, but your comment about you know that art needs to be neutral. I'm not sure how many people would agree with that, but I suppose in a particular kind of way. Anyway, we'll come back to that when we discuss things within the panel. Now we're going to go over to India, which is very much in the news at the moment. We're talking about how COVID is impacting our lives. If there's a place that COVID is having a huge impact on, that's India right now. So we're very grateful, Rashmi, to have you here with us and for you to be speaking to us from within a very challenging context. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate. I'm going to steer a little away from that part of the conversation today. But it's my cross to bear. As the 4th speaker, I have to make sure you're all interested and involved in what I'm going to be sharing. So I have a carrot to dangle. I'm going to quiz you after. No, that was a joke. I'm not really going to do that, but please do pay attention. I hope the presentation matches up. I'm just going to share it. Mike, if you can let me know if you can see it as it loads in. Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. What I'm going to be presenting today to you is, oh, I'm so sorry. It didn't seem to show. Just 1 second. Okay, it doesn't seem to work. But basically, this was the trigger question that was put to us as to how have arts and festivals evolved in the past year. And that's the slide that's strangely not showing up right now. And what I thought I could do in my presentation is give you a sense of how festivals have evolved in the past year, and then perhaps leave you with some provocations, which now I realize Martin has to a certain extent covered, but I would like to delve into it a little deeper from the perspective of the kind of work that we've been doing in the space in the last year. Just a little bit of a background about our organization. We're a strategic consultancy based out of India. Our focus is in 2 areas. On the one hand, we work a lot in the realm of sector development. So we work a lot with cultural organizations, individuals, professionals, to sort of carve a space for their growth, evolution, and thinking around the directions that they need to go. That work is also supplemented by, which is technically a core work, where we work with cultural organizations in a strategic capacity, advising them on audience development and cultural research. So these are our two areas and sort of beautifully feeds into each other. So what I'm going to be presenting to you is partly coming from, let's say for the want of a better word, that mind space and some data that's backing up a little bit about what I'm going to be sharing. So what's happened in 2020, right? When you think about everything that we knew over the last year, which is, and if you see this axis, you've got singular and participatory on the x-axis, and the y-axis, you've got digital and in person. And this is what we knew about festivals until February 2020, and it's just changed completely, right? So you've got a lot of singularity and a lot of participatory, mainly in the realm of digital, because there just seems to be so much uncertainty around masses of people gathering in the physical space. So, which directly, out of all the cultural work that we end up doing, it directly affects festivals. With this change of environment, how are we thinking? How are we responding? This is a piece of data that came from a study that we've been running with the British Council in India and the Federation of Indian Cultural, the Commerce and Industry in India, and us. We've been mapping the impact of COVID-19 on India's culture sector over the past year. So it's a tracer study that we are doing. So every 3 months we release a survey and literally just take the temperature. How are you feeling now? How's your business doing now? How are you working on things personally? So this allowed us to sort of understand how the sector has been responding to the crisis and what are the key questions that seem to be bothering them, and then advocate for those realities to authorities concerned. So one of the key stats that came from there was that 90% of the sector, of course, fears long-term impact of social distancing on the creative economy. So you're dealing with a changed environment, you're dealing with a lot of anxiety around how the world has been changing and evolving. And this, of course, was in 2020, but it's also led to a lot of innovation and collaboration. I think some of the conversations that we heard, I mean, the presentations that we heard earlier from Mark, Tegan, and Martino, aside from the provocations, also speaks of a lot of interesting ways in which we had to constantly respond through technological innovation and collaboration. So just to sort of give you an example, I'm so sorry that, again, it doesn't seem to be showing up. I'll try, but this slide was supposed to be NH7 Weekender, which is a festival that you're going to hear about tomorrow. So I'm not going to get into it too much, but it's a music festival that's run across 3 or 4 sites during the year. So you basically have this festival in Pune, which is the west of India, in Shillong, which is the northeast of India, and in Delhi, which is the north of India. And that music festival was taken online in December of last year. Dharam Sarvaiya, who's from the festival, is going to be speaking to you tomorrow. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it. And the slide doesn't allow me to spend too much time on it. But this was a literature festival. So just sharing a few examples of different kinds of festivals that have evolved. So the Jaipur Literature Festival is Asia's largest and the most prestigious literature festival. And it's been the mainstay of literary exchange between India, or rather South Asia and the rest of the world for the last few years. And JLF, typically, and I was talking to Sanjay Roy, who is the director of the festival, he said, in a physical format, we used to get about 13,500 people per location. So each, the Diggi Palace, the palace where the festival is hosted, has about 3 or 4 venues within the space. So each sort of venue, the largest venue they were talking about, had 13,500 people at the maximum capacity. And here you're talking about a footfall, a conservative footfall, he told me, about 30 to 50,000 online viewers. Question does remain, what do these online viewers mean? Just something to think about for later. Completely digital, they had a very interesting online experience, and they continued to sort of have the extended festival experience online even before the festival was taken online. So they had a series of sessions called Brave New World every week, sometimes twice a week, for the entire year until the festival took place early this year online. Here is, since we were talking about theater and in the context of performance, and this is a much larger and a challenging thing to do, right? So when you're talking about the digital space, it's been geared for literature and to a certain extent visual arts to respond quite easily, because you've got these genres which have a history when it comes to digital humanities. The digital humanities field came largely from literary studies to begin with, and then of course for the visual space, it's easier to evolve to. One of the most difficult contexts for this evolution has been the performative space. So within that context, here is Rangashankara Theatre Festival. This is from Bangalore. It's a 20-year-old theatre, which is really the heart and soul of theatre in the city of Bangalore in South India. And they did a mix of pre-recorded plays, a live show, which they showcased late last year on paid ticketing with a ticketing partner. And the reason why I want to mention the ticketing partner as well, because I want to use it as a trigger for you to ask Dharam tomorrow about the relationship with their ticketing partner when it came to innovating digitally for them. The last example here is the Serendipity Arts Festival. Now, Serendipity has been taking place for the last 4 years in Goa. And it's one of those destination festivals that people come to. It's a multi-arts festival. So if you can imagine the complexity of hosting such a festival across 12 sites within the city, within the state of Goa. And this festival was completely taken online with the virtual as a site. And I mean, I can speak a lot more, but I'm going to share these links with you, and you can read up about these festivals. And it was quite unique in the way every single event and project they conceptualized was using the digital as a site. So you're seeing a very interesting evolution of how these 4 have responded. The first one, the NH7 Weekender, was a sponsor-driven festival. The second festival was a free festival that's always been free. Of course, it's sponsor-driven, but it has a different kind of history and engagement. Ranga Shankar has a much smaller community theater festival, and now you've got a patron-funded festival, which was dealing with multi-arts. So everybody responded to the digital domain in their own ways. This was Ghar Se Museum. This is an initiative that we did last year, where actually it just came out of frustration, saying that we've got International Museum Day coming up. This was early part of May last year, and museums have not been able to respond the way some of the larger commercial organizations were able to respond. So we got a few organizations together and said, can you do any kind of programming online? And we called it Ghar Se Museum. Ghar Se is home. Ghar is home. So from home, museum from home was the title. And we got virtual walkthroughs, panel discussions, workshops. So not really a formal festival, but just a response to the crisis and how it was so easy to create something online and call it a festival, which in some sense puts a question to all of the work that we've been doing. But it's what we could do, right? So someone who's as pedestrian as us, who are not involved in production and curation, actually did get into that space just because we felt there was a need to respond to the fact that there was no visibility of our museums online as much as we would have liked to. So what this has also led to is, of course, inclusivity and access. And I know that some of you have already covered upon that, touched upon that. So an example of what we've been doing is, we've been doing pre-recorded or live digital sessions. And even though people can watch it live, we have either sign language interpreters that are live, or we record them separately and then stitch the videos together. So this way, so it's generally not easy for us to get SLIs, given our program budgets and stuff, but pretty much every session that we've done for the last 8 months, we've had SLIs. So it's allowed organizations to also open up channels and avenues for inclusivity and access. And we're seeing this consistently across various festivals where they have made a case and a space for this kind of inclusion. I mean, the Festivals Academy has already covered it. We've been using simultaneous language interpretation and live captioning as well, along with this. And I mean, you're talking about India, right? It's like it's a nightmare when it comes to talking about inclusion, when it comes to language inclusion. But what we've at least tried to do, and we insisted that with our clients, that we made sure that most of the sessions are simultaneously interpreted live in Hindi and Tamil. So at least one Northern Indian language and one Southern Indian language, to make it somewhat accessible to whatever extent we could. So those are the pushing of boundaries and experimentation that we could do in this past year. Of course, with that, we've also been dealing with different kinds of digital access. So this is a Heritage Water Festival, which is a heritage-driven festival where music is taken to heritage sites, and a live festival context was translated online, where the musicians and the filmmakers could actually go into sites and shoot in very diverse contexts, thereby bringing heritage home to people. I do want you to notice that not all of these innovations that we're talking about are high tech. And the reason I wanted to point that out is because when you're talking about the kind of, and I've seen some of your profiles. I mean, actually, I've gone through all of the profiles of the participants, and I could see the amazing spectrum of experiences of creation, where you're talking about AR and gaming and VR and all of that, and then you're talking about the global south, where the internet penetration is only on mobiles and then sometimes not even that. So how do you create in response to the needs of your community? So these are examples just to for us to think about some of those provocations in that regard. So where does that bring us, right? What is the future of festivals? And here I want to touch upon a little bit on what we've already covered, which is increasing technological innovation. So it's allowed for artists, media, digital artists, tech companies to respond to the pandemic through increased technological innovation. So this was an example of a media artist that did interactive online concert and created this platform which they debuted a couple of months ago. I'm not sure how they're doing at the moment, but this was an interesting one in terms of how a media artist was able to respond to these needs. There's obviously a much larger focus on health and safety than there ever has been in the festival circuit here. And that has been an interesting way, and we think will be some of the markers for what the future of festivals look like. But what it brings to me also is a lot of uncertainty. I think now I'm coming from a place where my presentation up until 2 weeks ago would have been slightly different, and I may not have brought up the notion of uncertainty, but literally feels like we've come back a full circle, right? Because we're dealing with the second wave, a much worse wave. The sector has been locked down again. We've been dealing with a lot of calls from organizations and colleagues and artists who are again dealing with a cycle of uncertainty. And here I wanted to take a step away from digital revolution, innovation, technology, and everything, and ask us, where are we as individuals, as organizations, as people who hold other people's hands in this time, and how do we deal with uncertainty? So I just wanted to use some examples from some of the sessions that we've done to give you that sense. So just to give you, again, a database context of where we are. When this was a report that came out early this year, and this was documenting, September to November in terms of how the sector was doing. So 71% of the respondents to the study had delayed their projects to 21-22, and now we're dealing with another wave. So what does that leave them with? And it also meant that about 30% was in the threat of closure. So we were already dealing with these kind of government regulations and increased uncertainty, and it's taken to another level over the last 2 weeks. And so how does this impact what you are feeling in your head? And we had a very interesting conversation about a few months ago on gig workers and COVID-19. And in speaking to the needs of the gig workers, and the reason why I bring up gig workers is because a huge proportion of us working in the festival space or in the art space in general tend to be independent freelancers. So what kind of support systems do we have for us to respond to the pandemic in this time? Skilling can only happen when you've got food on your plate and a calmer mind space to work through, and some amount of certainty and surety. So keeping that in mind, we put the session together, and I highly recommend, if you can check out this session, it will be great. Neha Kirpal, who's one of our speakers, she now runs a mental health platform called Inner Hour, and I remember she was asking this key question of, where do I start? And I would say one place to start is check in with yourself, check in with your colleagues of how you're feeling emotionally and mentally, and give yourself the room to breathe and take a break, because that's the first step to dealing with uncertainty, is questioning to a certain extent where you stand and realizing that things may change next minute and you have to go with the flow. The second area that I want to stress upon, of course, which directly connects, right? When you have a certain amount of money, it takes care of a huge amount of mental baggage that you're dealing with. So how do you look at from a financial perspective? And here I want to stress on sponsorships, actually. So this is a session that we did in November last year, where we got a few sponsors to come and talk about broadly how they look at return on investment and how their mental models are changing about supporting festivals. And we through that got some very interesting insights. So we asked them about their strategy to respond to COVID-19 and talking about their own cultural projects in the time that they've been supporting. So these are some of the terminologies that came from them, where they said, how can you be empathetic and responsible towards all stakeholders? And therefore, how do you engage with the sponsors, keeping that in mind? And their needs were that you need to create better technology solutions for shared experiences, because it has to match their ROI. So this is the kind of response that they shared in terms of what they advised cultural organizations to include in their strategy while pitching to sponsors here on, in the pandemic here. A little bit around how brands measure ROI. Of course, it would depend from nation to nation, region to region, but generally when we asked them about how it's changed in the pandemic, these are the metrics that they came up with. So organic and earned views, the brand tonality score, if they don't have one, how can you help them create one? Because the online space of experience is very different from the physical space of experience, and footfalls and quality of festival experience in the digital realm. Again, I'm using this for you to, to use as triggers to ask Dharam about this, because I know the work that he's done on NS7. And finally, how do you work with sponsors? So choose your sponsors widely. I know there's a requirement for money at the moment and resources, but how do you work with people who align with your value system? This relationship is dependent on each other. You shouldn't feel disadvantaged just because you're asking for money, because they're also getting something out of it. So how can you have a mutually respectful relationship and you come on the same platform as equals? And that kind of self-confidence is going to go a long way in you demanding your space in this world much too. And I'm tipping my hat to what Martin said about the fact that there is the value that we have and we hold, and how do we choose to share that and draw those boundaries around us. And how can you become a facilitator to help them deliver that value to their audience? So of course, and the last is of course, be creative and aim for long-term strategic alliances. The temptation will be there to meet short-term needs, but do keep the long-term in mind. The last thing that I wanted to share was, I'm so sorry, it was behaving perfectly fine when we did the tech check, but this is a 2-year project that we did with the Goethe Institute called Cultural Management in the Digital Age. And I'll just share both those links with you on the chat windows, but this is a 2-year project where we're working with cultural professionals to get them to think about how to work digitally. And this sort of covers a little bit of Martin, and what Tegan was sharing is just some theory around when you talk about digital humanities, think through who's the author. What does an archive mean? Who's the authority? Because the digital space is not objective, it's subjective. So the minute you think of the digital space, an objective space, you are bound to respond to what is being created online. So how do you move into the subjectivities of choosing what to create, what to exhibit, and who to engage with is going to go a long way in you having more control rather than being led by the digital.
Rashmi?
Yes. And anyways, my slides are not showing, but I'm going to share this with you. Sorry about this, but maybe I should have just refreshed it before starting the presentation. But that's all I had. Just a couple of things on next steps, because my slides somehow are not showing. Just our next program for Festival Connections, the work that we're doing with British Council, continues for this year. And we're also working on building a portal, a one-stop portal for festivals in India. So some of you may want to sort of see what's happening with the festival space or even collaborate. And this would be that one-stop shop for that. And finally, I'm just hoping to catch up with everyone over the next 4 days and see what demons we can fight and what new innovations we can draw out of all of us over the next few days. Thank you, Mike.
Great. Well, thank you, Rashmi, and thank you to all 3 of your colleagues as well. I know that it's really pressurized to give you 10 minutes to talk about such a big subject, so really sorry about that. But again, it's important to kind of have the provocations from this different context that we've just had, and to see this particular session not as being the one where we have to come up with all the answers, but it's really about raising the questions that all of you have done, and Martin, some of the big questions that you've asked as well, so that over the next 3 or 4 days, we'll basically be able to unpack them in the smaller groups, in some of the other panel discussions and the like. So just to say, in the chat, I've invited people who have questions to basically raise them there, but I'll maybe start with a couple of questions to each of the panelists. Mark, maybe to talk to you initially, particularly around COVID and its impact on the aesthetics of theatre, for example. So you spoke a little bit about how some of the forms have shifted as a result of having to go online and the like. And I think that for many people across the globe over the last while, people in the dance and theatre sector, for example, have retreated to the online space, and yet they don't necessarily have the skills to have produced the work that would be kind of acceptable for an audience in an online space. And given what they are competing with, where there are much greater production values with Netflix and Showmax and Amazon and the like, in terms of, do you think that there's potentially a genre for our educational schools to be training people in making theatre or dance, particularly for the digital space? Is that going to be, or is that a genre in its own right? Does it exist? Is it something that needs to come more? What are some of the skills that you think, given the experience over the last 14 months, that you think the theatre and dance community needs to learn?
I think they need to flow with the technology And I know that the amazing younger people that were working with our had much more facility with all of these things. And I think where drama departments and theater and film departments were very much separated, now um, now it's not so. So they're having shoot their own auditions, for instance, now. And so I think we're always going to be behind, and it'll always be maybe cruder. I remember back in the 1980s, we were using a lot of slides, which I said that's 1950s technology, but everyone was very impressed. So, and now we're dealing with, video projection, which is also way old. So, I think I'm anxious to see where this goes. And I think now that we've sort of broken the ice, it's going to create other opportunities. And there's been many experiments going on. How it comes back together is my big question at the moment.
I was also just looking in the chat, and Jerry, who's based in Nigeria, spoke about how they wanted to connect to you, but couldn't because of, I suppose, reasons to do with access to the internet, the speed of internet and the like. And I just wanted to ask that question because I think it's something that probably many of our festivals that have gone into the digital space kind of face now. Originally, our festivals were kind of created for the particular localities in which those festivals are based, and our primary audiences tend to come from those spaces. Now we've gone on to these digital platforms, and suddenly we have audiences from all around the world, and that's become a temptation in some ways. I was wondering how you kind of deal with that. Who are you making your festival for? Is it for people in New York, for people in the US, or for a global audience? And how do you deal with that dynamic of this potentially new audience that you have versus the one that has traditionally supported you?
I mean, this is the question that's on my mind most right now is what does a hybrid festival mean? And can you keep the best parts of these? For instance, I mean, the other thing is that we gave away our festival. It's not exactly a great business model. And we have to figure that out. If are people going to actually pay for this content? Or are they going to be so tired of Zooming that they're not going to watch? And what we do is very local, is very theater's a very local form. It has to be. And festivals are very local forms, no matter how international they are. They happen site specific. And so we have to think of that. Trying to make I hope that we will be able to incorporate this larger world, and I have great hopes we can. Yeah.
Talking about audiences, I maybe wanted to move on to Tegan. So the digital festival as a phenomenon that basically uses digital forms to make art still kind of happens in your particular case in a physical space traditionally. So people have kind of come to a physical space to enjoy and to encounter and to engage with the digital art that your creators have kind of made in a way. I was wondering about two things. How does it shift when you are basically providing that creative content onto digital platforms where people are no longer able to encounter it in groups or working together, but now in more kind of individual ways? And also wanted to maybe raise a question that Rashmi hinted at, and that is within the global South, many people, and Africa is a typical example of that, where most people probably have access to the internet through their mobile devices, through telephones, so that the experience of the art is on a very small screen. How does that kind of impact on the work that you do and your thinking about accessing audiences in future?
Yeah, it's an interesting question for us. I mean, one of the things where we might have gained a level of visibility internationally on the kind of work that's coming out of the continent from a digital perspective, we also lost a large part of our local audiences. And Fakugency is dominantly a development-orientated festival, so it's very much about developing young digital creatives and kind of platforming them and sort of finding out what their critical interests are. And, you know, one of the reasons we needed to do that is because there's a huge just disjuncture between what digitality and technicality, technological thinking is for someone living in Johannesburg, or so for someone living in Soweto, or for someone living in a rural area in Venda, in like a close to the elephant park, you know, who in terms of what else is available in the world. So for instance, I mean, I was kind of quite interested in what Martin was saying about the sort of radicalness of like how we live and the sort of a kind of an awakening that's come around to that. And I felt like this is something that we've been grappling with always. The questions of access, the questions of availability, the questions of how to engage, even like very serious questions, not only just about access, but very serious questions about disenfranchisement that comes with technology, how technology allows for a level of disenfranchisement of cultures, of ways of being. And I think Fakugency has always tried to engage that by keeping our audiences quite local and doing a lot of workshopping, a lot of like critical discussion about what technology means from a cultural perspective, trying to engage like an intergenerational encounter, knowing that we're inner city based. We've mostly focused on like urban encounters, but we have done pop-ups in other spaces. And going online, we lost a lot of that audience because that is a development audience. Even though they might be doing things through their phone, data is expensive. Like in South Africa, data is really expensive. I think in Kenya, you know, you're lucky because you've got the internet agency that has really worked hard with government to keep internet costs down. But there's a huge community of young digital makers or people who are, you know, teenagers and students who literally cannot afford to go online, let alone access that content. So that for us was a huge kind of awakening, just realizing that we would just not be accessing those people. And we saw the people that are coming into the festival either from the region, a lot more middle class, internationally, you know, people who are quite interested in what's happening on the continent and being able to see it in person, well, in person online for the first time. So it's a weird balance for us, you know, and how do we continue to meet both of those audiences, and how to continue to engage a critical encounter with access and disenfranchisement and technology through our festival, and as well as being able to promote young digital makers who are actually doing quite interesting stuff. You know, so for instance, our augmented reality stuff is always really fun and good and much more accessible than a Zoom call. So for people to be able to get onto an AR with a piece of graffiti in the city is much more accessible than to get onto a Zoom call for an hour. So it's also about thinking through some of those questions and solutions. Yeah.
Maybe just in terms of you know, serving primarily a local audience who generally also comprise some of those creatives. So as you say, you were creating a space for them to be able to learn from others and provide them with a platform and the like. Just by virtue of having access to an international audience, and there are now people like Martin, for example, who might want African creatives for his festival, might not that be a reason for a significant shift in terms of what your festival does? It now becomes primarily a platform for African creatives to enter the international global digital world.
Yeah, so that there's a huge opportunity there, and again, it's also about shifting the focus of what our festival does, and I think there's also a choice that needs to be made, or the two parts need to be served somehow within the festival. But I think, you know, one of the so Ars Electronica have been asking me for many years to put people forward for the prizes, the pricks and the starts and all of that stuff, and I have repeatedly sent things forward. And very rarely have pieces been selected, and it has a lot to do with the culture of expectation around what is digital production and what are the questions. So for instance, Marianne, who will be joining the session tomorrow, just ran AfroPixel, which is the festival in Senegal. And they were inspired by our festival last year, and they kind of used a similar theme, but they wanted to do a very specific focus around artificial intelligence and art making. So it's a big theme in Europe right now, like AI, and also in North America because of the surveillance culture and issues around civic rights. So, and they were like, who in Africa is doing artificial intelligence art? Like, give us the names of the artists that are doing these things. You're the people I know. And there is no one, because artificial intelligence is not accessible to most of the artists on the continent. And our governments aren't advanced enough or too corrupt to be able to be using artificial intelligence in a way that's impacting us in a very, very local way. Yes, I think we are needing to have a much bigger question about what that level of data collection and that level of processing does, what we're putting into the system. But they're not our systems. They're like American systems. So I think a lot of people feel like Americans can just go ahead and fight that fight for themselves. So so what is the question of AI? So now we've started doing workshops for artificial intelligence and artists to kind of understand, like, is there an interest? Why is there an interest? And the interest is largely around language diversity. There's a huge lot of work around data sovereignty, language diversity. So it's really about ownership and positioning more than like critical encounters of the surveillance cultures. So it's also a disjuncture for what is important to our audiences and our makers versus what's important to the European makers and audiences. And there's still a disjunction there. But I think there's also a language that needs to be learned about that, and language to understand why things are not important to us or are important to us and what they are, and making that part of another global conversation. Because it's definitely present and there's interest, but it might also just be a practice that needs to be put into place a little bit better.
Yeah, I think talking about disjuncture, there's also a huge disjuncture between the South African government's emphasis on the fourth industrial revolution. I mean, there are all these reports about how important the 4IR is for the country. And yet, as you say, data is so incredibly expensive that, there's how you're going to basically make these things accessible to people. But thank you very much for that, Tegan. Martin, I wanted to come back to the question around art neutrality, maybe for you just to explain a bit more, because in terms of what you were saying, you were making quite a strong case for art being quite radical in some ways. Talking about digital humanism, art presenting alternatives to the algorithms that kind of emphasize racism or it's anti-gender kind of orientation and the like. So maybe I misunderstood what it was that you were talking about.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for this question. I thought you misunderstood it, and I wanted to clarify this.
Sure.
Anyway. Art for sure doesn't need, if art is neutral, then what for do we have art? That is clear. So to make that clear. What I mean, it is a paradigm to give art a role in society. Art is discussed, let's say, in the Western Hemisphere, that it is, a so to speak, a parallel, a protected parallel world for the society. It should be totally innocent, and that was the right word, and not neutral. But what we see at Ars Electronica, and also what we see at the Ars Electronica submissions, is that what I said before, as artists are also citizens, they have a right to participate on the global challenges, and they want. And besides the will, they have the talent. There are many artists in their alternative thinking, could help engineers, could help scholars, could have many others who are trained to dig their hole, to just stay digging their holes, without looking right or left, to remind them that there is something else. What we also see is, in this art and tech world, that artists with their skills appear on the horizon, and they are coming up with concrete solutions. They are prototypical, but they are really there to kind of deliver something that is actually that has been coined by a different field of our society so far. And this is a very good sign, but it causes for sure at the same time this discussion: is it then still art? But you know, I start smiling on that, because for me, I see the entire situation that we are in so crucial that talking about whether it is art or not, hell, I mean, when we are losing time in doing that. And again, art, for sure. I mean, I see this because I'm allowed to, or I was allowed to curate many international exhibitions. Now it's as a game changer. That this that each culture has its individual understanding of what art is and should be. And looking just at the East Asian part, that there is, or also Russia, for instance, and with the film history, there is a theory, and the students are trained to learn the theory, and once they have it, they are there. But is this art? I mean, I'm a lot of time confronted when I show artists in Asia, like drones flying in a swarm or in doing patterns or so whatever, and they are sitting there and they said, but this is not art. And I tell them, hey guys, but why are these guys? I mean, why are these guys hugging each other? The question now is not, is it art or not? The question is that that art helps us with the alternative thinking, that we are always find methods to make a step forward, that we are going out of our normal to see what we are doing, to see ourselves in our behavior. And this quality is something that society is desperate, that is desperately needed in everything we're doing with technology, and in the very natural dilemma that, and the talent that we have embedded as humankind. And this is that we, due to the limits of our, let's say, senses, we got this brain, and this brain is able to extend ourselves with instruments and tools and we fall so desperately in love with our inventions, with our new technologies, that we think that we also have to invent everything with this technology. So what I want to say, the talent to invent, to create, is at the same time the dilemma we are in. We cannot escape this. We have to see this, and then we can deal with it. It's us. If we are human, we are actually, I think, not so special as we think. If we look at the Anthropocene and what is going to left, like in 1 billion years, people will anyway think that we are that we were pigs or plastic particles.
Yeah, Martin, we're sorry. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But no, don't be sorry. I think, you know, what you raise is such an important issue, that when we are engaged in the arts, and quite often we do act in these silos, we kind of see the arts as being acting within a silo, whereas we often make a case for the arts having some kind of transversal impact and culture in terms of, you know, values and belief systems and the like, the kinds of things that we deal with. One would think that we would be making much more of a case for our operating across the different sectors of our society, and to bring our innovation and to bring our resilience and all of those things to bear. So I think that what you have raised is is a very important thing for us to talk about a bit more. But I did want to give Rashmi just a final question. In terms of impact of COVID on our sector, one of the things that you mentioned earlier was about some of the sponsor-driven festivals in India. And I was wondering, because many of us have sponsor-driven or sponsored festivals, and I was wondering, from your experience, how has COVID kind of impacted on sponsors and what they believe a festival should deliver for them? Because now people are going online, they're reaching a different audience to the one that sponsor might have come on board for. How is it kind of shaping sponsor relationships at the moment?
Sure. So that's, I mean, let me just give a context of how this operates in India, right? So first of all, we have very, very limited state funding when it comes to culture. So a lot of your reliance when it comes to any kind of cultural funding or funding for your cultural projects and festivals is largely the sort of sponsor model that you work with ticketing, with or without ticketing, or you're relying on private grants and donations. This is the environment. So you often tend to be sponsor reliant, and you often tend to give the sponsor what they need. The second dimension to this is also that when we're talking sponsors, let's not look at it as one bucket, but there are different sectors and segments within the sponsors or the companies or the organizations that we can look at. So when you're talking about arts, friendly sponsorships, you are talking about alcohol and tobacco companies. You are talking about, maybe sometimes IT companies, depending on where the matches are, banking and financial institutions because of the cultural capital access that they need. So we also have to look at motivations of those sponsors. In India, advertising, I think for tobacco and alcohol was banned almost a decade ago. So what these advertisers have then done, or rather they sort of rely on surrogate advertising, where they'll create a product like a bottle of water and call it the same brand as the beer that they used to sell, or brand still, the beer still sells, but you can't advertise it. But they will get the water to then sponsor the festival. So this is the reality that these organizations have been working in. With sponsorships, therefore, I mean, the one very clear impact has been a larger economic impact. I mean, this is world over, right? You're talking about economies decimated because of the pandemic. So it has affected sponsorship significantly, and several festivals have not been able to continue their editions this year, which they were hoping to do in 2021, now remains to be seen. The sponsors that have responded and evolved to the needs, or rather to their consumers' needs, have tried to work with the festivals to see what new unique experiences can they create, because for them, they still need that engagement with the audiences on the ground. So for instance, a car company, which practically got no sales all of last year, was like, we still need to create and engage our audiences. So how can we use the arts to do that? So it's sponsor dependent on which organizations have been working in this space, and the fact that they may not have too many other avenues to work in the live context anymore, and hence they also require to innovate digitally the way we have to. The second is these are the sponsors who continue to look at a long-term value for their brands. There are some sponsors who will very clearly be like, I only want to see sales at the venue. Those are not the sponsors that have been supporting festivals digitally. It's the sponsors that have a very long-term view of their brand as to where do they see the value of the brand evolve over 5 or 10 years. And therefore, they're also able to see the opportunity right now. So that's the second thing that we've noticed. I think the third area is just when you break the sponsors down to segmentation and you look at the kind of sponsors that people have been tapping into. I think e-commerce has been quite big. I mentioned BFSI, insurance companies, because these are organizations and segments still making some money. But there are other organizations which have just blocked their budgets for almost the first 2 quarters. So auto companies, but the last 6 months, auto company sales picked up. So they started sponsoring again, and now it's again shut down. So it's an interesting way in which some of these sponsors have been responding, but some of them have been generally open, and some of them have been resistant because of the pandemic. And this is how largely they've been responding to festivals. From the festival side, I think it's the relationship that you have with the sponsor, and your ability to understand what kind of value can you provide to them, what kind of value do you have and you want to embed in every relationship you have, whether it's with the audience or with a sponsor. So having that clarity of vision means that half the battle is won. And having communicating that clarity along with alignment to the sponsor is the second part of the battle. The third part, of course, is you knowing the value, the physical value, the tangible value of your festival. So what would have otherwise cost you £100 to produce last year, according to the sponsor, that is going to cost you £20. So why should they be paying that much money? And that's a different kind of negotiation. So I really can't speak to that, because every festival's experience has been different. But then again, Dharam is our scapegoat for tomorrow. You should ask this question to him, because they've been working with Bacardi for the festival, and this is something that he will allude to. And I think lastly, it's just something that actually came through the previous atelier was one of the speakers there, one of the participants mentioned that they actually got sponsorships from a completely different dynamic in the online space. It was a small film festival, and they suddenly got sponsorship from a speaker brand in the US. So it's also newer segments that have been emerging, and your ability to, respond to those opportunities and sort of create new ways of audience engagement is what, to our understanding, has been making a difference.
Yeah, that's great. I suppose also by virtue of having a more global reach, you may be able to, as you just mentioned now, attract new sponsors who might want to reach your local audiences. So maybe these things have a way of working themselves out, but thank you very much for that. And folks, this has been a really insightful panel and one that has provoked really interesting questions. So thank you very much, Mark, Tegan, Martin, and Rashmi. It's been a really good initiation of these 4 days of us being together. As I said earlier, this is not about coming up with all of the solutions. It certainly is one in which we want some of the questions to be raised. And I think you've all done that very, very provocatively and well. So thank you. From my side, that's it for now. I'm going to hand back to Inge, who will do the final closure of this and let you know what's happening after this.
Thank you, everybody. And also thank you to the audience that followed our live stream. We will be back tomorrow at 12 o'clock, which is Brussels Central European summertime. So for all of you who joined us, there was even a hi for you, Mark Russell, on Facebook. So maybe you have to check it. See you tomorrow.